So today we're going to dive into 3 really powerful maps of the mind. You can think of them as these different psychological toolkits that therapists often use to help us figure out, why we do the things we do. If you've ever felt kind of stuck, these models might just offer a new way of looking at things.
I think we've all been there, right? That feeling of being stuck in a loop, running these patterns of thinking or behaving that just don't help you. It's almost like you're on autopilot. Well, the good news is these psychological toolkits are all about understanding those scripts, and this is the important part, learning how you can actually rewrite them.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to explore the world of cognitive therapies. Then we'll get into the games we play in our relationships with something called transactional analysis. And finally, we'll land on the here and now focus of Gestalt therapy. Let's jump in.
Okay, our first stop is cognitive therapy. And the core idea here is, honestly, it's simple, but it's a real game changer. Our thoughts create our feelings. That's it. If you can change the way you think, you can fundamentally change your emotional life. Everything in this whole approach really stems from that one powerful idea.
Now, there are 2 giants who really shaped this field, and they had a subtle but really important difference in how they talked about it. On one hand, you have Albert Ellis, and he was all about tackling what he called irrational beliefs. But then you have Aaron Beck, who preferred the term dysfunctional ideas. He saw them as being maybe too rigid or absolute, but not necessarily totally illogical. It's a small tweak in language, but it shows 2 different angles for tackling the problem.
So Ellis gave us this brilliantly simple model called ABC. Here's how it works. A is the activating event. Something happens. But that event doesn't directly cause C, the emotional consequence. Nope. The secret ingredient, the real power player, is B, your belief system. That's the filter you run the event through, and that's what determines how you feel. In other words, it's not what happens to you that matters most, it's the story you tell yourself about it.
Aaron Beck, on the other hand, gave us what's called the cognitive triad, specifically to help us understand depression. He figured that depression is basically fueled by this perfect storm of negative beliefs hitting you from 3 directions: negative thoughts about yourself, negative thoughts about your future, and negative thoughts about your experiences and the world around you. It's a really powerful way to see the architecture of depressive thinking.
And that brings us to Donald Meichenbaum's super practical approach, his stress inoculation technique. Well, it's kind of like a vaccine against stress. It's a 3-step process. First, you just learn to listen to your own inner monologue. What are you telling yourself? Then you start rehearsing new, more helpful self-talk. And finally, you take that new script and you apply it when you're actually in a stressful situation. It's just a really clear, actionable plan.
All right, let's switch gears. We've been looking at our own internal world. But what about how we interact with other people? Well, that brings us to transactional analysis, or TA, which was developed by Berne. And this is all about the psychological games that people play.
So the cornerstone of TA is this idea that we all have 3 ego states running the show inside us at any given time. First, you've got the parent. This is like a tape recorder of all the messages you got from your parents and other authority figures. It's full of shoulds and oughts. Then you've got the adult, which is your rational, logical, just the fact self. And finally, there's the child. That's your emotional, impulsive, and creative side.
Here's a perfect example of one part of that parent ego state. This is the nurturing parent talking. It's that voice that's sympathetic, caring, protective, the one that gives you permission to take care of yourself. But as we know, the parent has another side, and this is it, the critical parent. This is the master of shoulds and musts. It's that inner critic, that judgmental voice that's always pushing you and telling you you're not doing enough. And the fascinating thing is, we all have both of these voices inside us.
Okay, building on that, Tom Harris came up with these 4 basic life positions that pretty much dictate how we see the world. The healthy goal, the place you want to be, is I'm okay, you're okay. That's the winner's position. But the other positions, well, they lead to blaming everyone else or beating yourself up or just a total sense of hopelessness about everything. It's a really interesting way to understand someone's fundamental outlook on life. Have you ever been stuck in an argument that just goes around and never gets anywhere? Well, Stephen Karpman's drama triangle might just explain why. See, in these dysfunctional dynamics, people get locked into playing one of 3 roles. There's the persecutor, who's always blaming. There's the rescuer, who swoops in to help but really just wants to feel superior. And there's the victim, who feels powerless. And people will just switch roles, keeping the game going forever. And all of this, it all ties back to a really central idea in TA called the life script. Just think of it like an unconscious life plan,
a story that you write for yourself when you're a little kid. It's based on all those messages you got from your parents. And this script, which is often built on those very same irrational beliefs we were talking about earlier, can end up running your whole life. The games you play, the people you choose, everything.
All right, time to pivot to our third and final model. This one was developed by Fritz Perls, and it's called Gestalt therapy. And Gestalt basically asks us to just stop. Stop analyzing the past, stop worrying about the future, and instead just focus really intensely on what is happening right here, right now.
You know, the word Gestalt itself is super important here. It's a German word, and there's no perfect one-to-one translation English, but it basically means a unified whole. The big idea is that we are so much more than just a collection of different parts. The goal of the therapy is to integrate all those pieces of yourself that you've maybe pushed away or disowned and become whole again.
Perls had this amazing metaphor. He said, finding your authentic self is like peeling an onion. You start at the outside, at the phony layer, where you're just playing roles. Then you hit the phobic layer, where you're afraid of being you. Then comes the impasse, where you feel totally stuck. But if you push through, you get to the implosive and explosive layers, where you finally let your true self out and, poof, this incredible feeling of relief and energy.
Okay, a really core technique in Gestalt is about taking responsibility for your experience. And one of the sneaky ways we avoid doing that is with what Perls called it talk. Just listen to this sentence. It is difficult. See how impersonal that is? It creates distance between the speaker and what they're actually feeling. And here is where the magic happens. A Gestalt therapist would encourage you to change that it to an I. All of a sudden, it is difficult becomes I find it difficult. And then, often, you add, and I take responsibility for that. It's such a simple change in words, but the shift in power, it's huge. You're no longer a passive observer. You're owning your reality. So, if we were to boil Gestalt down, it's really all about awareness in the present moment. It's about noticing what you are feeling in your body right now. It's about asking, what am I doing, instead of getting lost in why am I doing it? And it's about having the courage to stay with uncomfortable feelings, because that's where the real growth is.
Wow, okay, we have covered a lot of ground. We've gone from the thoughts inside our head to the games we play with others, all the way to our experience in this very moment. And look, the goal here isn't to say one of these maps is the right one. It's about seeing them as different tools, different lenses you can add to your own personal toolkit for understanding yourself.
So let's recap the big ideas. Cognitive therapy tells us, challenge your thoughts, because they create your reality. Transactional analysis says, look at the patterns in your relationships, understand the games, and you can communicate better. And Gestalt therapy reminds us, all your power is right here, in the present moment. Embrace it.
And that really just leaves one final question for you to think about. As you reflect on your own life, your own patterns, your own relationships, which of these maps just clicks for you? Which lens helps you see your own world just a little bit more clearly? Thanks for joining me.